All right, yesterday, Republicans in the House Armed Services Committee used a marathon markup of the annual defense policy bill to address the shortcomings in the Biden administration's handling of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. But in the end, Democrats refused to acknowledge the Afghan debacle. And today, Democrats on the House Committee on Oversight and Reform rushed to mark up their $3.5 trillion, that's trillion with a T, reconciliation package, even as hundreds of Americans remain stranded in Afghanistan. What can we draw from the Democrats' inattention to the Afghan debacle? With me now to talk about this and more is Congressman James Comer, the ranking member on the House Oversight Committee. He represents the 1st Congressional District of Kentucky. Congressman Comer, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back on.
So, Congressman, to me, it appears like as I mentioned a moment ago, that the Democrats don't want to acknowledge the elephant in the room here, and that is what unfolded last week, leaving Americans and our allies in stranded in Afghanistan.
Not only would the Democrats not talk about that today, not only would they not commit to having a hearing with the Special Inspector General for the Afghan reconstruction, they also, instead of talking about Afghanistan or anything else that the American people care about from an oversight perspective, they wanted to talk about January the 6th. And we had a 5-hour hearing today, and the topic of the hearing was to electrify the postal fleet. They were wanting to spend billions of dollars to convert all the post office vehicles from gas to electric. And during this committee hearing, despite our pleas to talk about Afghanistan or try to have a hearing on Afghanistan and the weapons, how many weapons were lost to the Taliban, they wanted to talk about Donald Trump even more. So the Democrats are completely out of touch. Their lack of respect for our troops, for the Americans who Joe Biden left behind, is astonishing, and their disconnect is beyond belief right now.
I guess the good news, Congressman, if they want to focus on electrified postal vehicles, at least we won't have to worry about the Taliban taking them, because they probably will have no interest in those vehicles, unlike the tens of thousands of other vehicles that they're now driving around in Afghanistan that the United States left behind.
Exactly. I mean, that's what the House Committee on Oversight and Reform should be investigating, is how many vehicles, how much American taxpayer-funded military equipment was left behind in Afghanistan. And instead, the Democrats used a 5-hour hearing today to talk about one bill that would electrify the postal fleet, not to mention with all the problems the post office has, the main one being they don't deliver the mail on time anymore. They want to convert all the vehicles from gas to electric. It's just such a socialist, just liberal, out of touch group of Democrats in Washington right now. I mean, it just never ceases to amaze me what they choose to talk about when you have precious legislative time in Washington.
So, Congressman Comer, let me just step back for just a moment for the benefit of our listeners. What is the purpose of the House Oversight and Reform Committee?
We have broad jurisdiction over anything related to the federal government. So if you think about that, everything's related to the federal government. Obviously, the post office is a function of the federal government. That's why we were dealing with that today. We have jurisdiction over all the inspectors general. And we've been having, when Trump was president, the Democrats were always calling the special inspector general for the Afghan reconstruction in, because they were complaining about things that Trump was doing. Never mentioned the fact that, we lost, very few troops during the Trump administration. There's always been problems in Afghanistan, but in the 7 months that Joe Biden has been president, we've lost billions of dollars. We've lost 14 lives, military lives, and the Democrats don't even want to talk about Afghanistan now because it's on Joe Biden's watch. And the Oversight Committee is supposed to be supposed to be the committee that tries to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government. I mean, you talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. Afghanistan, if you Google government waste, fraud, and abuse, Afghanistan pops up on Google right now. That's how bad it is. But they don't want to talk about Afghanistan.
Well, am I correct that there was, did you receive a briefing this week from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan's reconstruction?
We did, and it was a closed-door briefing, and only members of the House Oversight Committee were allowed to participate. You couldn't be recorded or anything like that. It wasn't classified, but we couldn't let the American people see what's really going on. And
what can you share with us from that?
Well, I can share basically everything that took place in there. We just weren't allowed to record it. That was the Democrats' rule on the special briefing. But I can tell you, we lost billions and billions of dollars in weaponry to the Taliban. I think everybody knows that. President Ghani fled with $169 million of American cash. Now, how that happened, that's something the Oversight Committee or countless other, Homeland Security, Foreign Affairs, some committee in Washington should be investigating that. And Ghani should be court-martialed, but the Democrats don't want to talk about that. Also, we learned that for at least 2 years, the United States has been paying for fuel for Afghanistan, not just for the army they had that never fired a shot or fought back, but also for the government operations. And at least half of that fuel was being stolen by Afghanis that were supposed to be on our side. So all the signs were there that this corrupt government in Afghanistan probably wasn't going to fight back. And instead of taking that into consideration, Joe Biden left that Afghani force with a questionable president and a questionable generals in charge of the line of defense between the Taliban and the Kabul airport. So many mistakes by Joe Biden. The Democrats in Washington know this. They're just trying to cover up for Joe Biden's botched Afghanistan withdrawal.
You talk about the material that was left behind, the billions of dollars of military equipment. Now, there are claims that are out there that all of this material was demilitarized or it was left inoperable. Was there any discussion about that?
He couldn't confirm that. We don't know. But that's something obviously that Congress needs to be finding out. Well, I don't have confidence in our intelligence community. What Biden's saying is, well, we'll let the intelligence community find it out. Well, Joe Biden said he would let his intelligence community take 90 days to determine the origination of COVID-19. 90 days went by, which was 90 days to give China more time to cover up whatever was going on in that Wuhan lab. And just this week, Biden announced, well, the intelligence community couldn't determine anything. We need to look at the budget for the intelligence committee. I mean, if there was ever an entity that needs to be shaken up, it's our intelligence community. We spend a lot of money on intelligence. And when it comes to intelligence outside the United States, there have been a lot of bad advice and a lot of bad intelligence that's been relayed to numerous administrations, dating back to George Bush on Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. I mean, we've got an intelligence community that I don't think most credible members of Congress put a lot of confidence in.
Congressman, 30 seconds left. But in that briefing, was there any discussion about those left behind in Afghanistan, Americans?
Yes, and we have no idea how many Americans were over there. That was what came out of the briefing. We don't know how many are over there, and we're having to rely on what the State Department and what President Biden are saying. There are some people left over there. We don't know, and honestly, I don't think they know if there are any left over there. If that number's in the tens, is it in the hundreds? Is it in the thousands? We don't know, and that's just incompetence that the Biden administration didn't have a plan, didn't have a head count. This whole thing has been a disaster.
Congressman James Comer, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for leading the charge there on Capitol Hill.
We're going to keep fighting. Thanks for having me on.